They paired the Mafia boss with the obese woman as a joke. His response silenced the entire room. She walked into the room and every mouth closed, not out of respect, out of anticipation. 12 men at a long table, crystal glasses, cigar smoke, and the most feared man in Portland sitting at the head with a face that could crack marble. They'd told her she was there for a job interview. They'd told him she was his match. Both lies, both designed to detonate. Everyone in that room was waiting for the explosion. The Mafia boss looked at her for 5 seconds that lasted a lifetime, then turned to the man who'd arranged it and said, "Leave, before I forget we're family." They set her up to be humiliated and him to be furious, but neither one played the role they were given. Subscribe and hit that bell, because what happens next between these two will wreck you in the best way. Inez Marin was 26 years old and had spent most of her life making beautiful things for people who never looked at her twice. She worked as a seamstress at a bridal boutique in Portland's West End, a shop called Lace and Line owned by a woman named Margot, who treated generosity like a transaction. Inez altered wedding gowns, evening dresses, custom pieces for women who stood on pedestals, while she knelt at their hems with pins between her teeth. She was good at it, better than good. Her hands could reshape fabric the way a sculptor reshapes clay, precise, intuitive, alive. But no one ever asked about her hands. They looked at the rest of her and stopped there. Inez was plus size. She'd been plus size since she was 12 and had spent 14 years watching the world decide what that meant before she could speak for herself. Lazy, undisciplined, invisible. The words followed her like a scent she couldn't wash off. Her mother had been a seamstress too, a quiet woman named Elida, who taught Inez to thread a needle before she could write her name. Elida died when Inez was 20. Cancer that moved faster than anyone expected. No father in the picture. Never had been. Just Inez, a sewing kit, and a rented room above a boutique owned by a woman who charged her for the privilege of being useful. Margot's boutique served Portland's wealthiest families, and the wealthiest of them all was the Sarin family. Old money, deep roots. The kind of name that made restaurant hosts straighten their posture, and bank managers return calls within the hour. The family matriarch, Cordelia, had been a client for years. Fittings, alterations, custom pieces for every gala season. And Cordelia's obsession for the past 2 years had been finding a wife for her nephew, Roland Sarin, 37, the head of the family's empire, the legitimate businesses on the surface, the underground operations beneath. He ran Portland with a stillness that frightened people more than violence ever could. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He made decisions with the patience of a man who had never once needed to repeat himself. Cordelia had arranged 7 matches in 2 years. Roland had rejected every single one, returned photographs, walked out of dinners, canceled introductions before they began. His patience for matchmaking was the one thing in his life that had a visible limit. Cordelia's youngest son, Mattis, saw opportunity in his cousin's resistance. Mattis was 29, reckless, perpetually jealous of Roland's position, and constantly looking for ways to undermine him without getting caught. The matchmaking failures embarrassed Cordelia. Another failure would infuriate her, and if that failure was spectacular enough, humiliating enough, it might finally crack the bond between Cordelia and Roland. Mattis walked into Margot's boutique on a Tuesday afternoon. He found Inez in the back room pinning a hem. He told her Roland Sarin was looking for a personal assistant and that she'd been recommended. Good pay, flexible hours, a chance to work in a proper household. Inez was suspicious, but desperate. Margot had cut her hours twice that month, and the room above the shop was getting harder to afford. She said yes. What Mattis told Roland was different. He told him Cordelia had found the perfect match. A woman from a respectable family, well-spoken, elegant. He described everything Inez wasn't, because the joke required the gap between expectation and reality, to be as wide as possible. Mattis wanted Roland to see Inez walk through the door and erupt. He wanted the family to witness it. He wanted Cordelia humiliated for her matchmaking obsession, and Roland exposed as the cold, cruel man Mattis believed him to be, underneath the composure. The dinner was arranged for Thursday evening. 12 family members and associates seated around the long table in the Sarin Estates formal dining room. Inez arrived in a navy dress she'd altered herself, clean lines, modest, the best thing she owned. She walked through the front door expecting an interview and found a dinner party, a place card with her name beside the head of the table, and 12 pairs of eyes watching her with barely concealed amusement. She understood instantly. The setup, the lie. She was the punchline. Her face burned. Her stomach dropped. She turned toward the door. Roland's voice stopped her. Not loud, not sharp, just present. Wait. She turned back. He was studying the room. Mattis's grin, the suppressed laughter, the anticipation on every face. He read it in 3 seconds. Then he turned to Mattis. Leave, before I forget we're family. The grin dissolved. Mattis opened his mouth. Roland's gaze closed it. Mattis left. 2 others followed. Roland stood across the room and pulled out the chair beside his. Sit down, please. Inez sat. Her hands were trembling. He poured her water himself, set the glass in front of her. You were lied to, he said. So was I. But you're here now, and the food is good. They ate. The remaining guests were silent, uncertain. Roland asked Inez what she did. She told him about the boutique, the fabrics, the way silk behaves differently than satin under a needle. He listened, not politely, the way people listen when they're waiting for their turn to talk. He listened the way a man listens when he's learning something. At one point she made a quiet observation about the dining room curtains being hemmed unevenly. Roland's mouth twitched. Almost a smile. Almost. After dinner, his driver brought the car around. At the door, Roland said, Mattis owes you an apology. He won't give one. But I will. I'm sorry you were brought here under false pretenses. Inez looked at him. You don't need to apologize for someone else's cruelty. I do when it happens under my roof. She got in the car. On the drive back to the boutique, she pressed her hand to her chest. Her heartbeat was quick and confused and alive. The most feared man in Portland had pulled out her chair, poured her water, and apologized for a joke that wasn't his. She didn't know what to do with that, but she held on to it all the way home. 3 days later, a black sedan pulled up outside Lace and Line. Roland's lieutenant, Darris, broad, quiet, the kind of man who communicated primarily through nods, walked in and handed Inez an envelope. Inside, a handwritten note in sharp, unhurried script. I need alterations on several suits. You were recommended. If you're interested, Darris will drive you. Inez read it twice. She hadn't been recommended by anyone. The suits didn't need altering. She knew it. He knew it. But the invitation was real, and the reason underneath it was something neither of them was ready to say out loud. Margot watched from behind the counter, eyes narrowing. The Sarin estate? What business do you have there? Inez folded the note. Alterations. She picked up her sewing kit and walked out before Margot could say another word. The estate was quieter without the dinner guests. Roland met her in the front hall. Dark sweater, sleeves pushed to his elbows, the tension in his frame dialed down to something that almost resembled ease. He led her to a dressing room off the main corridor. 6 suits hung on a rail. Every one of them fit him perfectly. Inez ran her fingers along the lapel of the first jacket. These don't need altering. Then we'll call it a second opinion. She looked at him. He looked back. Neither smiled, but something passed between them that was warmer than a smile, an understanding that the pretense was thin, and neither of them minded. She took measurements anyway. Her hands moved with professional precision along his shoulders, across his back, down his arms. He stood still, patient, quiet, giving her space to work around him without crowding. At one point, her fingers brushed the fabric at his collar, and she felt him go still. Not tense, still. The way a man goes still when he's paying attention to something he doesn't want to miss. She came back twice that week, then 3 times the following week. The suits remained perfectly tailored. The visits continued anyway. They built a rhythm. Dinner in the kitchen, not the formal dining room. Roland cooked, simple, competent, the food of a man who'd lived alone long enough to refuse to eat badly. They talked. She told him about her mother, Elida, the seamstress who could hem a dress blindfolded and who sang while she worked. He told her about inheriting the family operation at 28 after his father died, how the weight of it turned his temples gray before 35, how silence became his default because speaking meant deciding, and deciding meant someone lost. One evening after dinner, Inez noticed a tear in the curtain by the kitchen window. Old fabric, sun-faded. Without thinking, she pulled a needle and thread from her bag and repaired it in 2 minutes. Quick, precise, beautiful stitches that disappeared into the weave. Roland watched her hands the entire time. He didn't comment. But the way he looked at her shifted, like he was seeing a skill that commanded respect, not a body that invited judgment. Back at the boutique, Margot was sharpening her knives. "People are talking, Inez. A woman like you spending evenings at the Saran estate. Do you understand how that looks? You're embarrassing yourself, and you're embarrassing my shop." The words landed like stones dropped from a height. Inez said nothing. She went upstairs to her room and sat on the edge of her bed, hands folded, breathing through the hurt the way she'd learned to. Quiet, practiced, the patience of a woman who'd been absorbing blows her whole life. Mattis was not breathing through anything. He was building. The joke had backfired and his ego couldn't absorb the failure. He spread rumors through Portland's social circles that Inez was a gold digger, a con artist, a woman who'd targeted the Saran family for money. The whispers reached the boutique's wealthy clients. 2 canceled orders within a week. Margot blamed Inez for both. Roland's people brought him the gossip within hours. He traced it to Mattis in 30 minutes. He didn't confront him yet. He filed it the way a man files a debt he intends to collect in full. Instead, he invited Inez to dinner. She arrived to find the kitchen table set for 2, candles she suspected Darris had been instructed to buy, and Roland standing at the stove with the sleeves of his shirt rolled up and a look on his face that suggested candles were not his natural territory. She almost laughed. Almost. They ate. The conversation went deeper than before. She told him about growing up plus size, the way the world decided what she was before she opened her mouth, the diet advice from strangers, the job interviews where she could see the decision made before she sat down, the loneliness of being visible for all the wrong reasons and invisible for all the right ones. Roland listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "The world is full of people who measure others by the smallest possible standard. It tells you nothing about the person being measured and everything about the people holding the ruler." The next afternoon, Inez saw Mattis on a Portland society blog. Photographed at a charity auction, arm around a model, grinning for cameras, the caption called him one of Portland's most dynamic young leaders. Something crystallized inside Inez. Not broke. Crystallized. Mattis, who'd sent her to be humiliated, was being celebrated. She, who'd done nothing wrong, was being whispered about. But Mattis was a performance. All surface, no structure. She was real. She'd always been real. And real outlasts performance every single time. That evening at the estate, Inez was quiet. Roland noticed. He always noticed. "Say it," he said. "Whatever you're holding, say it." She broke. Not screaming, speaking. Every word she'd swallowed since she was old enough to understand what people meant when they said fat with disgust in their mouths. The boutique, Margot, the clients who looked through her. the men who never looked at all, a lifetime of being told she occupied too much space in a world that refused to make room for her. It poured out steady and devastating, the testimony of a woman who'd been quiet long enough to know exactly what her silence had cost her. Roland didn't move. He listened the way he always listened, completely, without performance, without rushing toward a solution. When she finished, he said, "You don't take up too much space. Everyone else just stands too close to their own smallness." Inez looked at him. For the first time in 26 years, she didn't feel like she needed to shrink. She felt seen, not despite her body, not because of it, but beyond it, the way she'd always wanted to be seen and never believed she would be. Roland held her gaze. Something warm and terrifying passed between them that neither was ready to name, but it was there, and it wasn't leaving. 2 weeks had passed since the dinner with candles and the conversation that cracked them both open. Inez spent most evenings at the estate now. Roland hadn't called it anything. Not dating, not courtship. He just kept making space for her, and she kept filling it. They'd built something quiet and steady without announcing it to anyone, and the privacy felt like protection. Mattis was done being quiet. The joke had not only backfired, it had produced the opposite of what he intended. Roland was softer, more present. The family noticed, and Mattis couldn't stand it. He went to Margot. Together they built a case for Cordelia, the family matriarch. Their argument was simple and surgical. Inez was a nobody, a seamstress, a woman with no family, no money, no social standing. Associating with her publicly would embarrass the Sarin name. Mattis framed it as protecting the family. What he was protecting was his own reflection. Cordelia summoned Roland. The meeting was private. Cordelia's study, closed doors, the weight of 3 generations pressing down on every word. She told him directly, end the association or face consequences within the family structure. Not violence, fracture. Cordelia controlled significant assets. She had the loyalty of the elder members. She could make Roland's position uncomfortable in ways that had nothing to do with threats and everything to do with isolation. Roland listened in silence. Then he said, "I'll take the difficulty." That evening, he told Inez everything. The family meeting, Mattis's campaign, Cordelia's ultimatum. He didn't soften it. He laid it on the kitchen table beside their coffee cups like one more thing they'd handle together. Inez's face went still. "Then maybe I should go." "Is that what you want?" "It's what makes sense." "I didn't ask what makes sense. I asked what you want." She was quiet for a long time. Softly, "I want to stay, but not if it costs you everything. Let me worry about what it costs." Roland confronted Mattis the next day. Not with fists, with truth. He told Mattis he knew about the rumors, the gossip campaign, the coordination with Margot. He told him the matchmaking joke was designed to humiliate both of them, and that it backfired because Inez was worth more than every match Cordelia had ever arranged. Mattis sneered. "You can't be serious. Her? The family will never accept it." Roland's voice went quiet, the kind of quiet that makes dangerous men pay attention. "The family doesn't choose who I love. I do." That night, Roland told Inez about his mother. Her name was Sarah, a baker's daughter from a small town who married into the Saron family because Roland's father loved her. The family never accepted her. They mocked her accent, her clothes, her background. His father loved her, but never defended her publicly, not once. She withered under the pressure. She left when Roland was 12. He hasn't seen her since. "I watched my father lose the only good thing in his life because he cared more about the family's opinion than her heart," Roland said. "I won't make that mistake." Inez reached across the table and took his hand. He held on. The night before the gala, the annual Saran family event where Cordelia expected Roland to appear alone, signaling the end of things with Inez, they were in the kitchen. She was mending a button on his jacket, the one he'd wear tomorrow. Her hands moved with that quiet precision he'd come to admire more than anything he'd ever owned. She finished, smoothed the lapel, and looked up. Their faces were close. The space between them hummed with everything they'd built over the past month. He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His hand lingered. "Come with me tomorrow," he said. "To the gala. Not as a guest, as mine." Her eyes filled. "They'll tear me apart." "Let them try. I'll be right beside you." She nodded. Day of the gala, the Portland Art Museum, Cordelia's event, 400 guests. Inez dressed in silence. The gown was deep burgundy, one she'd made herself, every stitch deliberate, not decoration, armor. She walked downstairs. Roland was waiting. Dark suit, the jacket she'd mended. When he saw her, he stopped. He didn't compliment her. He looked at her the way a man looks at someone he'd face his entire bloodline for. She almost smiled. They entered together. The room shifted. Whispers spread like gasoline waiting for a match. People recognized Roland. People recognized the woman beside him, the seamstress, the plus-size woman from the gossip. She was supposed to be invisible. Instead, she walked through that museum like every painting on the wall was there to frame her. Cordelia intercepted them, composed, cold. "Roland, this is unacceptable." He didn't stop walking. "Then don't accept it." Mattis appeared, glass in hand, smirking. "I see the joke's still going." Inez stopped. She turned to Mattis. Her voice was clear and steady. Not a tremor, not a stutter, not a single crack. "The only joke in this room is a man who sends a woman to be humiliated because he's too small to face his cousin directly. I'm not your punchline, Mattis. I never was." The room heard it. Mattis's smirk died on his face. Roland took the stage during the family toast. He was supposed to thank Cordelia and reaffirm family unity. Instead, he spoke about his mother, the baker's daughter driven away by this family's judgment. He spoke about what happens when powerful people decide who's worthy based on appearance and status, rather than character. "This family has spent generations deciding who belongs," he said. "I found someone who never needed our approval to be worth everything, and I'm done apologizing for choosing her." The room went silent. Cordelia sat rigid in her chair. Mattis was pale, and Inez stood in the crowd with tears running down her face and her head held high. The silence lasted 6 seconds. 400 people processing the most feared man in Portland, standing at a podium choosing a seamstress over his family's approval. Cordelia stood. The room braced. She walked toward the stage, her face carved from stone. She stopped in front of Roland. For a long moment, nothing. Then quietly, not for the room, just for him. "Your mother would have liked her." She turned and walked back to her seat. It wasn't warmth. It wasn't approval. But it was the first crack in a wall that had stood for decades, and cracks don't close once they start. Mattis's position collapsed with Cordelia's concession. The family members who'd backed his campaign read the room and shifted allegiance with the practiced ease of people who understood which way power flows. Mattis stood alone near the bar, champagne in hand, allies gone. He approached Roland after the speech. "You've made a mistake." Roland looked at him with the patience of a man who'd already won. "The only mistake was yours. You sent her to me." The gala continued. Something shifted in the room's atmosphere. Not acceptance, not yet, but the particular silence that falls when people are recalculating. Women approached Inez, cautiously at first. One touched the fabric of her dress. "Who designed this?" "I did," Inez said. By the end of the evening, 3 women had asked for her card. The seamstress, who was delivered as a punchline, was being asked to dress the women who were supposed to laugh at her. 6 months later, a studio in Portland's Pearl District with tall windows, natural light, and a sign above the door in clean letters, Marin Atelier, a custom design house for women of all sizes, women who'd spent their lives being told fashion wasn't made for them. Inez built it from the sewing kit her mother left her and the stubbornness she was born with. Every dress that left the studio was measured with care, stitched with precision, and delivered to a woman who stood in front of a mirror and saw herself, maybe for the first time, the way she deserved to be seen. Margot's boutique lost 4 major clients after word circulated about how she'd treated Inez. She tried to rehire her twice. Inez declined both times, politely, without bitterness, which stung worse than anger ever could. Cordelia quietly removed Mattis from his position within the family's operations. Not punishment, consequence. He managed a warehouse on the east side now. He didn't attend family dinners. He didn't make jokes anymore. Roland had restructured, stepped back from the harder edges of the operation, handed logistics to Darius. He was investing in legitimate businesses along the Pearl District, including the building Inez's atelier occupied. He'd bought it without telling her. She found out 3 months later. "You could have just told me," she said. "Where's the fun in that?" On a quiet evening after closing, Inez was pinning fabric on a dress form. Roland sat in the corner reading, the way he did most evenings now, present without pressing, a man who'd learned that the most powerful thing he could offer was space to work and silence that didn't demand anything. She turned to him. That first dinner, when Mattis left, and the room went cold. She paused. "You stood up, walked across the room, and pulled out my chair. Then you poured my water yourself. You didn't explain what had happened. You didn't make a speech. You just poured water and said the food was good." Her eyes were bright. "Every man I've ever known either pitied me or looked through me. You just poured water like I belonged at that table. Like it was obvious. Like there was no version of that evening where I didn't deserve to sit beside you." She swallowed. "That's when I knew." Roland stood, crossed the studio. Inez met him halfway. The kiss was hers, her choice, her moment, not because he rescued her, because he pulled out a chair and never once made her feel like she didn't deserve to sit in it, because he saw her hands work before he saw anything else, because he chose her in front of 400 people and didn't blink. The kiss happened in a studio she built with her own hands, surrounded by fabric and light, and the quiet proof that the woman they sent as a joke became the woman who dressed the city. A warehouse on Portland's east side, fluorescent lights, metal desk, Mattis Sarin staring at a tablet propped against shipping manifests. A lifestyle magazine interview on the screen. The headline described Marin Atelier's expansion, second location, Portland monthly feature, 3-month waiting list. Inez photographed in her studio, laughing, a measuring tape over her shoulders. Roland visible in the background, reading in his corner. Mattis stared at the screen. His thumb hovered over the close button. He pressed it. The screen went dark. The warehouse hummed around him. He sat in the silence of a joke that became everything he'd never have. They sent her as a punchline, a plus-size seamstress delivered to the most dangerous man in Portland so everyone could watch the explosion. But the explosion never came. Instead, a man pulled out a chair, poured a glass of water, listened when she spoke, and saw, in the woman they dismissed, something worth choosing over his own family's approval. She didn't need saving. She needed someone to stop laughing long enough to see what she could build. He stopped. She built. And what she made, with needle, thread, and the kind of strength that doesn't announce itself, will outlast every joke, every whisper, and every small person who measured her by the wrong standard. If this story hit somewhere unexpected, don't keep it quiet. Drop a comment and tell us what you'd name your atelier. Share this with someone who's been the punchline long enough to know that the last laugh is the one that matters. Subscribe, ring that bell, and be here when the next one drops. It hits different. We'll see you there.